While financial headlines debate inflation and interest rates, the world's most sophisticated monetary institutions are making a completely different calculation, one that could reshape everything you think you know about money itself. Picture this scene: Warsaw, Poland, November of 2019. 8 heavily armored aircraft touch down under cover of darkness at the city's main airport. No passengers emerge from these planes. Instead, crews begin unloading precisely 8,000 gold bars, each one weighing exactly 400 ounces. The precious cargo represents 100 tons of Poland's national gold reserves, secretly transported from London vaults back to Polish soil in the largest repatriation operation in the country's modern history. What makes this midnight gold rush particularly striking? Polish central bank officials coordinated these flights without any public announcement, using military-grade security protocols typically reserved for state secrets. The operation required months of planning, diplomatic coordination with British authorities, and logistics that rival major intelligence operations. Poland wasn't acting alone in this quiet rebellion against traditional gold storage arrangements. According to the World Gold Council's official data, Turkey's central bank accumulated over 540 tons of gold during 2022 alone, making it the world's largest official buyer, despite facing significant economic pressure from international markets. Think about the scale here. Turkey was adding roughly 45 tons of gold per month, while their currency faced devaluation pressures. Singapore's monetary authority has transformed the island nation into Asia's primary gold trading hub, adding 69 tons in just the first quarter of 2023. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan, Czech Republic, and other former Soviet bloc nations are building domestic gold stockpiles at rates that haven't been seen since the Cold War era. But here's the number that should grab our attention. Global central bank gold purchases hit 1,136 tons in 2022, representing the highest official buying since record-keeping began in 1950. The 2023 and 2024 data shows this wasn't a temporary surge. Central banks maintain purchasing levels above 1,000 tons annually, demonstrating sustained institutional demand that contradicts everything we hear about the cashless future and digital currency dominance. What triggered this coordinated return to precious metals? The watershed moment came when the UK government seized Venezuela's gold reserves, effectively confiscating 31 tons worth approximately $1.8 billion from the Bank of England's vaults. This action sent shockwaves through emerging market central banks worldwide, particularly those storing significant portions of their national reserves in London, New York, and other Western financial centers. The message became crystal clear: gold stored in foreign vaults isn't truly yours when geopolitical tensions escalate. Central bankers who spent decades trusting international storage arrangements suddenly faced an uncomfortable reality. Their most critical monetary assets could become political hostages overnight. These institutional money managers aren't making emotional decisions based on fear or nationalism. They're strategic architects with access to monetary data, policy discussions, and economic modeling that the general public never sees. When the world's most sophisticated financial institutions simultaneously pivot toward accumulating physical precious metals, they're revealing calculations about future monetary stability that haven't reached mainstream financial media. The central bankers who ordered those Warsaw flights understood something about timing that most people are just beginning to grasp. They recognize that monetary systems experiencing fundamental stress don't announce their vulnerabilities through press releases or policy statements. They reveal themselves through the quiet actions of institutions positioning for what they know is coming next. But why this sudden urgency? The answer lies in mathematical realities that make the current system unsustainable, combined with practical alternatives that are already processing billions in transactions outside traditional banking networks. Let's follow a specific example that demonstrates how these new systems actually function. In the Kazakhstani mining region of Kostanay, freshly extracted gold travels along a route that would have been impossible just 5 years ago. The precious metal moves through Central Asian corridors, where commodity weight units replace currency denominations entirely. Chinese refineries receive shipments that are settled not through SWIFT transfers or correspondent banking, but through physical gold weight calculations that bypass Western financial infrastructure completely. Iran's oil-for-gold exchanges with China reveal the sophisticated mechanics behind these alternative networks. When Iranian crude reaches Chinese ports, payment doesn't flow through traditional banking channels that could be monitored or interrupted by sanctions. Instead, Physical gold settlements worth billions of dollars move through networks that process transactions in days rather than weeks, using verification systems that satellite technology makes virtually fraud-proof. The Shanghai Gold Exchange now rivals London's centuries-old market dominance, processing over 2,000 tons annually through trading mechanisms that operate independently of Western price discovery systems. These aren't theoretical future possibilities. They're operational realities handling massive transaction volumes right now. Here's where the mathematics become impossible to ignore. According to Federal Reserve data, approximately $13 trillion in global dollar reserves currently exist across central banks, commercial banks, and institutional holdings worldwide. This staggering sum represents promises backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Yet consider this against a simple physical reality. The total amount of gold ever mined in human history equals roughly 200,000 tons. Think of this like structural engineering. If you were designing a foundation to support a skyscraper, you'd calculate the load-bearing capacity of your materials against the weight they need to carry. In monetary terms, we're attempting to support $13 trillion in promises with backing assets that couldn't possibly cover those obligations if confidence wavered. The economic theory explaining this structural impossibility is called the Triffin dilemma, named after economist Robert Triffin, who identified the contradiction in 1960. When one nation's currency serves as the global reserve, that country must run persistent trade deficits to supply international liquidity. But those same deficits eventually undermine confidence in the currency's stability, creating a mathematical contradiction that grows worse over time. Russia's brief attempt to peg the ruble to gold in early 2022 lasted only weeks before practical pressures forced abandonment. But the experiment revealed something crucial. For those few weeks, international oil contracts priced in rubles suddenly carried implicit gold backing, demonstrating that commodity-backed currency mechanisms can function in modern markets when political will supports them. The challenge isn't technical capability. It's the transition period when old systems break down faster than new ones can scale up. But emerging economies are solving this coordination problem through what economists call network effects. Each nation that develops gold-based settlement capabilities makes it easier for trading partners to adopt similar systems. What's particularly striking about current central bank behavior is the speed of accumulation. Turkish gold purchases in 2022 represented roughly 15% of global mine production being absorbed by a single central bank. When you multiply this demand pattern across dozens of monetary authorities simultaneously building reserves, you create supply-demand dynamics that conventional financial models can't adequately capture. The mathematical inevitability becomes clearer when you examine historical precedents. Every fiat currency system in recorded history has eventually collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, typically lasting 30 to 40 years before structural failures to force monetary reset. The current dollar-based system, established when Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, is now operating in its sixth decade, well beyond the historical average for monetary stability. Central banks are recognizing that we're approaching what engineers call the structural failure point, the moment when confidence breaks rather than bends. Unlike gradual devaluation that markets can adjust to over time, confidence failures in monetary systems tend to cascade rapidly once critical thresholds are breached. The institutions moving gold reserves understand that mathematical realities don't respect political preferences or convenient timing. When structural limits are reached, adjustment becomes inevitable, regardless of whether policymakers or markets are prepared for the transition. Yet skeptics argue gold belongs in museums, not modern markets. They're about to discover how profoundly wrong they are, because cutting-edge technology is solving every historical problem that made gold-based systems impractical for international commerce. Picture a transaction unfolding between Moscow and Mumbai that demonstrates how dramatically the technological landscape has changed. A Russian energy company needs to pay an Indian manufacturer for specialized equipment. Rather than routing payment through correspondent banks that could take days and face potential sanctions, the transaction flows through a completely different infrastructure. The payment begins with blockchain verification systems that track gold ownership in real time across international borders with satellite precision. Smart contracts automatically execute currency conversions based on precious metal spot prices verified simultaneously by multiple global sources. What once required weeks of banking coordination now completes in minutes, with cryptographic security that makes traditional wire transfers look primitive by comparison. Central bank digital currencies are being programmed with automatic commodity backing algorithms that adjust in milliseconds rather than the manual processes that made previous gold standards cumbersome. When Venezuela's central bank digital bolivar was briefly linked to gold reserves in 2023, transactions cleared faster than traditional SWIFT transfers while maintaining verifiable precious metal backing that users could audit independently. Russia's digital payment infrastructure, developed under sanctions pressure, processes cross-border settlements that bypass Western banking entirely. The system handles billions in transaction volume using verification protocols that satellite surveillance makes virtually impossible to manipulate. Each gold-backed transaction is tracked from extraction to storage with GPS accuracy that eliminates the fraud concerns that historically plagued precious metal commerce. The technical infrastructure now exists that makes the 1971 Bretton Woods collapse seem inevitable, but operating in reverse. President Nixon abandoned gold backing because tracking and verifying precious metal reserves across international borders was too cumbersome for modern transaction volumes. Today's satellite monitoring, blockchain verification, and automated auditing systems eliminate every technical barrier that made gold-based international commerce impractical 50 years ago. Emerging economies are leapfrogging legacy financial infrastructure entirely, building payment systems around commodity backing rather than retrofitting old currency mechanisms. Kazakhstan's new digital payment platform processes transactions in gold-weight units that automatically convert to local currency at the point of sale. Users can hold balances backed by precious metals stored in government vaults while spending through mobile apps that function exactly like traditional digital wallets. The speed advantage is becoming undeniable. Traditional correspondent banking relationships require multiple intermediary institutions, compliance checks, and clearing processes that can take 3 to 5 business days for international transfers. Gold-backed digital transactions using modern verification technology complete in real time, with settlement finality that traditional banking can't match. What makes this technological revolution particularly powerful is how it combines the monetary credibility of precious metal backing with the convenience features that users expect from modern payment systems. You can send a gold-backed payment from Seoul to São Paulo faster than most domestic wire transfers, with transaction costs that rival cryptocurrency networks and security guarantees that exceed traditional banking. The satellite surveillance component solves authentication problems that historically made international gold commerce vulnerable to fraud. Every bar, coin, and ounce can be tracked through the entire supply chain with tamper-proof digital signatures that verify authenticity, weight, and purity in real time. This level of transparency and verification would have been impossible during previous attempts at gold-based international monetary systems. Central banks are recognizing that technological convergence has reached a tipping point where commodity-backed digital currencies offer superior functionality compared to fiat alternatives. The convenience gap that historically favored paper money over precious metal backing has not only closed, it has reversed in favor of technologically enhanced gold-based systems. When Poland's central bankers orchestrated those nighttime gold flights, they weren't moving wealth backward into the past. They were positioning assets for integration into monetary technology that makes gold more practical for international commerce than it has ever been in human history. The ancient store of value is about to become the most modern payment system on Earth. So, what does this technological monetary revolution mean for anyone who earns, saves, or invests in dollars? The implications reach far beyond central bank vaults and international trade corridors. They're reshaping the fundamental assumptions underlying every retirement account, investment portfolio, and savings strategy in America. Consider the story of Khalil Mansour, a mechanical engineer in Beirut who spent 30 years building what he thought was a secure financial future. His Lebanese pound savings account, government bonds, and local real estate investments represented decades of disciplined financial planning. When Lebanon's currency crisis erupted in 2019, Khalil watched his lifetime of savings lose 90% of their purchasing power in 18 months. The numbers in his bank account stayed the same, but those numbers could no longer buy groceries, pay utilities, or fund his daughter's education. Khalil's experience illustrates what economists call silent devaluation, the process by which monetary policy prioritizing debt financing over currency strength gradually, then suddenly, erodes the wealth of anyone holding promises rather than assets. What happened in Lebanon represents an extreme version of pressures building within every fiat currency system operating under similar mathematical constraints. Portfolio reality check. Traditional 60-40 stock and bond allocations assume dollar stability that our own central banks are actively undermining through policies designed to manage unsustainable debt levels rather than preserve currency purchasing power. When Federal Reserve officials acknowledge that monetary policy must accommodate trillion-dollar annual deficits indefinitely, they're revealing priorities that make currency devaluation inevitable rather than accidental. Norwegian sovereign wealth fund managers, overseeing over $1.4 trillion in assets, quietly began rotating portions of their portfolio into precious metals as insurance policies against currency instability. According to internal strategy documents, these institutional managers recognize that traditional portfolio theory becomes inadequate when the currencies underlying all investments face structural pressures that mathematics makes unsustainable. Swiss and Canadian pension funds are implementing similar strategic adjustments without publicity, recognizing that their fiduciary responsibility to retirees requires positioning for monetary transitions that historical analysis suggests are approaching. These institutional moves reveal professional investment management, adapting to realities that retail financial advice hasn't yet acknowledged. Historical timeline analysis reveals that major monetary transitions typically take 7 to 15 years once institutional momentum builds, and multiple indicators suggest we're already several years into this process. The gold repatriation movements, central bank accumulation patterns, and alternative settlement system development represent early-stage infrastructure building that accelerates dramatically once critical mass is achieved. The wealth reallocation effect becomes clear when you understand the transition dynamics. Early adopters capture the revaluation benefits when monetary systems reset, while late adopters end up funding the transition costs through currency devaluation that transfers purchasing power to those who positioned before the shift became obvious. Think of wealth as water flowing through channels in the global financial system. When traditional currency channels become damaged or unreliable, that wealth finds new paths towards stores of value that maintain purchasing power across monetary transitions. The institutions moving first aren't creating this flow. They're positioning themselves where the current is already beginning to redirect. This doesn't require complex financial expertise or insider connections to understand. The same mathematical pressures that drove Poland's central bankers to repatriate their gold reserves apply to every savings account, every retirement plan, and every investment portfolio denominated in currencies facing structural sustainability challenges. The choice framework becomes straightforward once you strip away the complexity. Either the current monetary system continues indefinitely despite mathematical contradictions that history suggests are unsustainable, or adjustment occurs according to patterns that precious metal allocation helps navigate successfully. Those 8 flights over Warsaw weren't moving gold backward into history. They were moving it forward into the future. The central bankers who ordered those flights understood something that most people are just beginning to grasp. Monetary systems transition according to mathematical realities rather than political preferences. And positioning before those transitions accelerate makes the difference between preserving wealth and funding other people's preparation. The only question remaining is whether you'll recognize this shift before it reaches the point where individual preparation becomes significantly more expensive than it is right now.